Hi, welcome to FedScoop TV. I'm Colby Hockmuth. Joining me is Stephanie Grosser, Senior Advisor for Data Technology and Communications at USAID. Thanks for coming, Stephanie.
My pleasure.
First, I'm going to start off with talking about what projects are you working on at USAID that have sort of leveraged new types of technology?
Great question. So at USAID, actually a year ago, I helped to spearhead a new project that used crowdsourcing to open a USAID data set. So using new technology. So basically we had 100,000 records of economic growth projects that USAID has done, but the location field was completely non-standardized. And we didn't have the money to hire someone to kind of go through and standardize and geocode all that information. And so I had to think outside the box. And instead of using the general USAID tools, I said, there's a lot of people in the public who would love to work with us, who love international development. Why don't we use technology to create a crowdsourcing platform and let them interact with us and standardize and geocode all these records? The process by which I had to get this approved within a government agency was very difficult because, as I said, crowdsourcing is not a typical tool in our toolbox in government. And so there was a lot of questions about whether or not we could use free labor, whether or not the quality would be good enough. The list goes on, and I had to overcome all of those challenges in order to use new technologies to leverage the crowd. In the end, we did get to yes, and we were able to harness the energy of citizens to work with us. And it was extremely successful. We had all of our records cleaned and geocoded in 16 hours at a success rate higher than a computer algorithm. So I think it installed confidence in people within government that this approach can be successful moving forward.
Right. So with the theme of lowering the cost of government, how do you think that open source can be used in government to save money?
So in my mind, open source isn't just about using open source code that people can build on, but it's about changing the model of government to become more open source as a model in terms of process. And so actually the administrator of USAID, Rajiv Shah, he coined a term open source development. So USAID, is the US government agency that works on international development abroad. And he said, we don't have a monopoly on all the good ideas and all creativity, and so we could speed up how quickly development happens if we actually opened up our problems and had the crowd, the public, work with us through grand challenges, through crowdsourcing, et cetera, to come together and really think about how to solve these problems. And so to me, open source is this new model of saying if all of society's problems are this big and government has the people and the resources to solve this many of that huge amount of problems, then by opening that up, we could actually do so much more, not necessarily lowering the cost, but with the same budgets that we have, how much more can we do? Because budgets are shrinking and demands are growing, so we have to start thinking of these new models for actually solving our problems as a society.
Right. Now, with that being said, what sort of place do you think crowdsourcing should have in government?
I think that crowdsourcing has the potential to actually transform government and transform the role of the citizen, right? Instead of being just a recipient of government services, the citizen can actually be an active participant in the governance process in this new way. I think one of the barriers to that happening is all of the legal and bureaucratic challenges that I kind of alluded to earlier in my own crowdsourcing project. After I worked on this crowdsourcing project, my partner and I wrote a case study that kind of documents all of these barriers and how we overcame them. And I think that if crowdsourcing as a tool and as a method was legitimized within government so that people wouldn't have to reinvent this very difficult wheel every time they wanted to use it as a process, then you could actually make that one of the standard ways of doing business in government, and that we could actually do so much more.
Right. So the president set a deadline, November 1st, for our agencies and departments to open up their data. Do you think that they're going to be able to meet that deadline?
So just to temper expectations, I think that by November 1st, it's true that that's the deadline to have all of the agency data sets that have been opened already listed, and to have a list of all the data sets that can be opened but haven't been opened yet. And so this is obviously a long process of opening all of the data sets in government that don't have restrictions such as national security concerns or personal identifiable information. So it's definitely going to be a long process. November 1st, November 9th, that's going to be the initial date where you see the work that we've done in the last 6 months, but every quarter after that, we're going to be adding to the list of what we can open. But I think it's also kind of a cultural change that has to happen in agencies. It's not hard to imagine that in the past, people in government who have these data sets feel like they own the data sets. They're scared to open it up for whatever reason, sometimes very, very valid reasons of maybe the data is not accurate. Maybe there are concerns very valid concerns that they're worried about sharing. And so the process by which we're kind of saying, actually, it's not your data, it's in the public domain, it was paid for by the US taxpayer, so we're gonna have to, now it's the new law that data by default is open and machine readable. So that is like a cultural transformation that has to happen where people need to believe and want to open data in order for this to be a success. And it's interesting because, for example, the new executive order says if it has personal identifiable information, you don't need to open it, right? Mm-hmm. But the data set that I worked to open in my office did have information that we couldn't release. And so if we didn't have our heart set on opening our data, we would have said, we get a waiver because it's exempt because we have some information that has privacy concerns. But instead, we found ways to delete those columns and really anonymize all the records so people wouldn't be able to figure out who the beneficiary was in each case. And we were able to open a lot of records. And when I read to people the list of columns that we had to delete, they always say, oh my God, what can be left? You just listed everything that could be interesting. But then I show them what we did open, and even though it's it's much broader, there's still great information, and people have used this data, and it's really helped the field of economic growth and loan guarantees. And so even though, so I guess my point is that because we wanted to do it, we didn't say we can't because of this reason. We said, we want to do it, how can we get to yes for our data set? And unless people who own the data sets want to do it, there could be a lot of excuses why they could say this can't be public. And so that's why I think that the hard work isn't just the new requirement to open data, but it's convincing people that it's good for them to open data, because once you expose your information, people will give you really important feedback, and then you could do your job better.
Right. Now, you mentioned shrinking budgets, growing demands. What can our government leaders be doing to make sure that their agencies or departments are keeping up with new technology?
That's an awesome question. I love it. I think that, so if you think of the role of the CIO in any agency, as you know, the role of the CIO has really been shifting from providing support to actually integrating technology in how we do business, so we could do business faster and better, and in some cases cheaper. But I think, being from a program office and not from the CIO's office, that a lot of innovation with technology is actually going to come from the program offices, because they know their data, they know what they want to do with it. And in my case, it was very hard to use crowdsourcing and the technological platforms that go around that, because of all the people who said no. In a bureaucracy, when you want to do something new, the answer is going to be you can't do that, and it's true. There's a lot of laws that mean that we can't do a lot of things, right? But because I had the president, right, who is committed to open data and transparency, because the administrator of USAID has this amazing attitude where he's like, take risks, innovate. We have to innovate because we can't afford not to, right? And the boss, Ben Hubbard of Development Credit Authority at USAID, also encourages his office to take risks and to be creative. And so the best thing that leaders can do is tell their staff it's okay to take risks. We need to be taking risks, because the way we've been doing business isn't going to get us where we need to be. We have to do governance better and faster. And so I would love to see more people exemplify these ideals of inspiring creativity and saying it's okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm Colby Hockmeath with VetScoop TV.